Parliament represents a terrific backdrop to today's episode. Governance implies having the people, the structures, and the processes by which one group ensures that another group does the right things at the right time and for the right reasons, both operationally and strategically. Our country does that through a federal government. Companies do that through an advisory group or a board of directors. Now, governance isn't a household name, but scandal is, and you just have to look around the news to know we've had our fill of it lately. In today's episode, we're going to look how good governance protects and actually enriches an organization. And we're also going to look at whistleblowing and why it takes courage to do that, and why we need whistleblowers to have that courage whenever governance fails us. Our first guest is Lillian Foster, president of Renault Foster Management Consultants. Lillian is an award-winning business leader right here in Ottawa and a pioneer in good governance. Almost a third of her company's business is based on providing expertise in good governance internationally. She does that for companies, governments, even the World Bank. With Lillian, we're going to explore the differences between good and bad governance, why it's so important to the reputation and protection of long-term value within an organization, and hopefully get our viewers, you, to look at your own governance structures in review. We're here with Lillian Foster. Lillian, thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Lillian, governance isn't a term that a lot of people understand or use every day. So to help everyone set the scene, if you will, tell me, please, what perspectives you're coming from for this discussion, and help us to define better the term governance.
I come at governance from three different perspectives, Richard. One, I've been a corporate director or a director of various boards since the mid to late 80s. I also come at it from the perspective of having the pleasure and the opportunity to teach governance as of the late 90s to various academic institutions, from Telfer to Rotmans to Schulich. Schulich were the first ones that partnered with us. And I think the third perspective I come at it from is the most useful. It's that I actually consult with boards across the country and internationally, which are really enlightening, and help them understand governance and help them deliver on their governance to the best of their abilities. So enhance their governance. What is it? What are we talking about? I would say governance is a combination of a science and an art. And it doesn't have to be rocket science. So a simple definition, textbook definition almost, you're talking about what are the structures and what are the processes that you use to run an organization, run a country, run a company, or even run a team for that matter. So you're talking about structures. Do you have a board? Do you have an executive committee? Do you have 3-4 partners in a professional services firm that are practicing the oversight for the firm? So that it all goes to structure. Processes are, how do you run the place? How do you make decisions? So there are 5 or 6 elements of accountabilities for boards, whether it's Canada, the US, and in fact, governance is converging around the world. And the major ones are almost using one's judgment. What are we doing? Where are we going as an organization? Yes, and one of the things, which is one of them, one of the things we've done at Renault Foster to make it easier to understand governance is, for many years now, I have edited a small diagram. And I can just show a picture and people can get a sense of, oh, so that's what you're talking about when you talk about processes. So the processes to decide where the company's going. What's the mission of the company? What business are we going to be in? Is it a strategic plan? The processes to decide and to develop the skills in your organization to assess your CEO or to even assess your own board. The processes used to have great stakeholder relations. Many people do not realize that stakeholder relations is actually an accountability of boards.
That's a very helpful positioning for it. So now I'm going to take that, I'm going to apply it against current events.
Okay.
To say the least, it's been a very bad season
Yes.
for governance and for ethics. Just looking back on a short list, the Ontario government has a number of agencies that have been riddled with either scandal or allegations of corruption. The City of Montreal is on its I don't know how many mayor and is riddled with corruption allegations. Global banks, some of which are respected names. Barclays has been involved with the LIBOR interest rate settings. HSBC with money laundering allegations for drug cartels, of all things. Large corporations respected globally like SNC-Lavalin, corrupt to the point of heavy fines and CEO dismissed. So I have to ask you a very simple but I think a very important question. Where were the directors?
It's an excellent question, and as some of your viewers would know, it was actually the title for the very first governance guidelines in this country, which were led by Peter Day, and it were called Where Were the Directors? And it was a reflection in the early 90s of bank failures in the 80s, predominantly in Western Canada. There are many ways of answering that question. It's not just where were they, it's who were they. By that I mean what kind of competencies did they have? What kind of ethics did they have? One of the biggest contributors to the failure of Enron was a combination of greed and fear. Fear from some of the experts on the board that maybe others shouldn't speak up. Greed because many people decided to instead do the best for the corporation, do the best for themselves. Sometimes you don't have the competencies. For many years, there were a number of organizations that didn't realize that they needed more than just people on the board that understood the business of the company. So if it was a technology firm, you needed more than techies on the board. If it was a scientific institution, you needed more than scientists or researchers. They did not necessarily have the skills to do financial oversight, have the skills to manage human resources, have the skills to separate the role of oversight from the role of management.
There's a lot in the news lately about organizations, even governments, thinking there should be regulations to increase the number of women by quota almost on boards. But there have been countless studies to show the enrichment value of having a better gender balance on boards. Can you just talk about that for a second?
Yeah. I feel very strongly about that, and it's not just because I'm a woman. It's because I've sat on many boards. I had the opportunity to be alone as a woman on the first major corporate board in Toronto that I sat on for a few years. The guys would walk away from a board meeting, go use the washroom, come back and say, let's vote. And that's
to the exclusion of you.
Absolutely, to the exclusion of me. They weren't thinking, they weren't mean, they weren't irrational. It was they were used to doing it that way. Yeah. I feel quite strongly about it because I have seen boards that have the gender balance and boards that don't, and how men and women question differently. There is evidence, there's real evidence now that with women on boards, it's not that we're better, we're different. They're more judicious, they go into greater detail, they're more careful, they're more cautious, they're less sometimes caught up with egos, not always, but sometimes. So I'm one of these people that firmly believes we need to go to quotas in Canada. We are way, way behind. We should be ashamed. And it's not because you got to have women and got to have guys and gals. It's not what it's about. It's about doing the best for the corporation, doing the best for the company, doing the best for the not-for-profit. And I would go so far as to say, do the best for the country. Because structure and processes, if you go to the structure of our governments, that's governance. And if you don't have enough women representation and different opinions of thought, and independence of thought, you won't have as rich a decision.
Liliane, we often see leaders arise at the time we need them most, when there's a crisis, and we tend to learn quite a bit about organizations and businesses when we hit a rough patch. And so some of the questions I want to pose in a moment talks about some of those rough patches, but I want to focus first on the positive. Are there any corporations or types of organizations that come to mind that are that you admire for the way they affect governance?
Yes, there are some, but let me give you the attributes of why I admire
Perfect.
them. Okay, I admire them because they have found a way to instill a healthy culture within that organization, especially within the board. But you need board and management; it's like a team. So they have found a way to instill a culture of trust and respect. Trust means you can challenge your colleague, and the world won't fall apart. You don't leave them out there if for some reason they challenge something. So that is one of the key pieces. Good leadership, a chair or a lead director, depending on what you call the person who leads the board, a good leader, one that again is inclusive, respectful of all the people around the table, seeks out the insights and the expertise of the different players, and recognizes that they as a chair only have one vote. They only have one vote. And they are not the bosses, they are the leaders. So where I've seen that, I've seen boards that seem to function better. And then last but not least, boards that work at, usually through a matrix more and more now, work at trying to have complementary competencies on their board, finance, legal, maybe the technical if it's technical, maybe scientific if it's scientific.
Multidisciplinary team.
Yes, but also governance expertise that they've sat on other boards, people who understand the role of oversight versus the role of management. Those are the kinds of boards that seem to work better. But the culture of trust and respect is huge, because I've seen organizations that have all their processes exceptionally well documented. We walk in there, we do a governance review, we read everything, we say there's nothing wrong, then we interview everybody, and we find that management does not trust the board, or the board doesn't trust management, or they're at each other's throats, because somehow or other the trust and respect has disintegrated.
When I was involved over many, many years of my career consulting to companies, especially family-owned businesses, we used to have a phrase we used, and that we understand you take a lot of time to work in your business. You have to have some process by which you can work on your business.
That's correct.
And that's that forest in the trees.
Absolutely. That's a perfect analogy, and it's a simple analogy. There are great professional firms, by the way, professional services firms, that create an executive committee that does oversight, as opposed to going out and getting an outside board. Right. But they're wearing a different hat. They're not there to do the work. They're there to do the oversight of the work. And they're not the bosses necessarily, but they do have a quality assurance role. And that can be very enriching as well.
Now, you've been with organizations that have set up and started inaugural boards.
Yes.
What adjustments did they have to make in terms of perspective or attitude or expectations now that they all of a sudden, quote, had to answer to another organization or another level?
And I've actually had the privilege of helping organizations decide on whether or not they should have a board, how to set it up, what kind of people to go and find for their boards. I really think the biggest challenge is to understand that it's a different role. I firmly believe that. Even people on boards who are quote unquote a director, in some cases, don't get it. They've been managers their whole life, and all of a sudden they're put on a board and they're still second-guessing management instead of taking it to a higher level, big picture, icebergs. What else could we be doing? What are the risks out there that maybe you cannot see down in the engine room? I don't know if that's answering it for you or not. Did I miss something?
No, it is. It's a good answer, actually. And so I'm thinking now of the viewer watching this and listening to us. And the first inclination, if they start to think, oh, maybe I should at least seek input, external input. If not even setting up a formal board, could I start with a source of external input?
Absolutely. And I would suggest, particularly in private sector, small enterprise, that's the route they go initially. And it can be as few as 3 people. And we did that at Renault Foster. I became so convinced of the value add of a governing body when I learnt governance by the seat of my pants back in the 80s and 90s, that I did 2 things at Renault Foster: set up the governance practice, because I saw so much value add to have good oversight, but I also set us up with an advisory board. Now, an advisory board has no financial accountability, and ideally should not be able to make any money out of it either, I might add. Some people break that rule, but they're not an advisory board all of a sudden. And all we did was bring 3 people in. I would caution our audience to, once again, not just go for friends who like you, who think you're great, you're doing a wonderful job, and who will not challenge you.
I was just going to ask you about friends, because we talked earlier about diversity and similarity, and how important diversity was. So we want to encourage the memory of that. So if we look at an individual that an organization may look for external input, or actually if they have a board, to invite a new director to join, what makes a good director? In its generic form, what makes a good director?
It's a great question. In no particular order of priority, it's do your homework. Some people go to board meetings. I've been on boards, and they're flipping through their materials at the board meeting, so they really can't take the higher ground. We went through a period of...
Or we're slowing everything down so they can keep up.
But not only that, they really haven't internalized everything, therefore they can't bring good advice. They're really hard-pressed to bring good advice. We went through a few years where we said the 3 rules of governance were attendance, 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 and that's because so many boards failed, because it was like a social club, and they went to supper, but they didn't necessarily go to the board meetings. Independence of mind, independence of thought, and yet collaborative. A board director has no power whatsoever, and many directors don't realize that. You have no power at all. The board has power. A CEO has power. A director has no power. So if you can't get that group as a board, whether it's an advisory board or a board of directors, to align on things, then you need one voice, and if you can't get consensus and get them to align, you've got a problem. So you need people on the board that can work collaboratively, that can listen to other people's opinions, but at the same time, if it doesn't feel good, if it doesn't smell right, I call it the smell test, that they will speak up. At the risk of alienating their colleagues, they will speak up. There were people on the Enron board for a number of years that didn't speak up, but that saw the problems, and it's because it was fear. It was fear. They were being intimidated.
We talk in a number of episodes about the need, especially these days, always, but especially these days in these economic conditions, of collaboration. And collaboration, we're finding, is not possible without that mutual support.
That's correct.
And how many boards have I been part of, where the dinners were held after the meetings, not before?
That's a very good example. Yeah. It's before. And I actually have done things like gone to chaired board meetings where I could sense you need, ideally, a fair amount of emotional intelligence, not just IQ. And there's a new saying now: a good chair, a good leader of a board is head up, not head down, so that you can scan, so that if somebody's got their hand up or somebody's going, you can go, Jack, do you have a problem with that? Is there a chance? Because not everybody is going to just jump out.
That's the thing I think a lot of people don't realize. They look at a board of being very experienced, very reputable, very well-known people and think they're all very strong. But they're all either forthcoming or shy in their own regard. And they may be quiet. And if you don't pull those feelings out and those perspectives out, I think you're losing something.
And you cannot be an expert at everything.
Yeah.
You cannot be. So you need others occasionally to shine a light on what you're saying.
So maybe with the viewers knowing that they can't be an expert at everything, they're now thinking maybe about external input and maybe in advisory boards or boards of directors. Liliane, I want to thank you very much for coming.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
It's been delightful. Thank you.
Whistleblowing is often described as the last desperate act to right a perceived wrong when all governance fails. Our next guest knows an awful lot about whistleblowing. Alan Cutler is arguably one of Canada's most famous public servants. As a senior procurement officer for Public Works, he refused to sign off on contracts that he felt broke the rules. He was warned that his continued refusals would bring negative consequences, but in 1996, Alan decided to blow the whistle on the improper procurement processes in the federal government. That action directly led to the now infamous sponsorship scandal and the ensuing Gomery Commission. Alan paid a terrible price for that decision. Personally, it created great emotional stress. Professionally, it dead-ended his career. But the Gomery Inquirer later spoke up on his behalf and said that he had a courage to speak up and commended him. The reality is that in spite of that decision, and despite of the price he paid, he would do it again. You see, for Alan Cutler, it's a matter of a leader maintaining his values. So we're here with Alan Cutler, who's president of Alan Cutler and Associates and president of Canadians for Accountability. Alan, welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Let's put together what we know. We know whistleblowing comes out when the normal repair mechanisms are broken, when there is no leadership function actively listening and trying to actively accept problems and deal with them and try to fix them. So whistleblowing, we can say, is a desperate act, a courageous act, that comes out when nothing else works. And it's for the altruistic good of seeing good done. So understanding that, why is it so hard, even to this date, and we see this in the news, to get good, solid whistleblowing laws passed and real, tangible protection for whistleblowers in government or in enterprise?
I would say one of the major reasons is everybody pays lip service to it. And it goes into what we will talk about, the various categories that work with whistleblowing. But people all say they believe in whistleblowing until it affects them. Okay? Yeah. And the second they think they could be embarrassed by it, harmed by it, and I've seen whistleblowers with serious cases walk away because they figure that management would spot them, know who they are, and they would bear the brunt, and they'd rather see the corruption go on than solve the problem.
Alan, is there a feeling of futility for the whistleblower when he walks away?
What you have to do is first realize who the whistleblower is. The whistleblower is the one who isn't going to give up, because there are a number of people who start out on the process and then drop off. They just don't have what you would call the fortitude or the stubbornness or the,
tenacity.
Well, tenacity, I was going to say bullheaded. But yes, they just don't have the ability to go on. Right. They look, and they often have two fights they're going on. One is with their management, mm-hmm. and the other is with their spouse. Their spouse is saying, what are you doing to us as a family? So they're fighting it at work, and they go home and they're fighting it at home.
A common element of the series in all of our episodes is trying to bring out fundamental ingredients for successful leadership, so that regardless of what organization someone who's viewing this is leading, they can get something from it. So in my last question with you today, I want to ask you, what can organizations do to assist the safety climate, the safe climate for a whistleblower, or at least raise a process by which allegations of corruption, allegations of wrongdoing or errors or heightened risk can be assessed honestly, safely, openly, and actually investigated as in an honest way? What can an organization do?
There's leaving the organization as part of the solution. There's two elements that really have to go. One is good laws, which we do not have in this country. We're a third world country in terms of whistleblowing laws. The other one is culture. If you recall, smoking in the office place was very acceptable how many years? 20, 30 years ago?
Not that long ago.
And culture changed with social pressure, and now it is totally not allowed. It's actually in the law, but nobody would accept it. Somebody would comment on it if it happened. Drinking and driving. I can recall my university days, but my kids never did what I did.
Yeah, you hope.
Okay, I hope. But the thing is that society developed an ethic against drinking and driving over time, which has been a major improvement. So where I work with Canadians for Accountability is we are aware of the laws, but we work on the culture. And what we try and do is, with any organization we can, we try and talk to people. Anytime I'm invited to participate in anything, I participate. Because the more we expose the problem, the more we gradually change the culture. And it's one person, one day at a time.
Now, you've been called into organizations to consult. What's your approach when you first come into an organization? How do you approach the issue of good governance, effective governance?
Oh, it's relatively easy when I'm talking to the chief of an organization, and I'm pretty open, and you can tell I'm relatively relaxed and friendly when I'm doing this. I just say, do you mind if we talk about whistleblowing? And you learn very fast. The ones who say, no, you can't talk, we don't have a problem, you know darn well they have a problem. And then there's the others who say, you want to talk, go ahead, talk to anybody you want to talk to. You know, seminars, whatever you want. You know, they don't have a problem because they're so open already.
Yeah. It's a wake-up call for a lot of organizations and certainly a lot of leaders, isn't it?
It sure is.
Alan, thank you very much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
In this episode, we learned two things. A good governance structure ensures that you can protect the value and reputation of your organization, the reputation you've worked so hard to build. And we've also learned that whistleblowing, while drastic, is a very important part and should be protected in every governance structure. It allows a leader to hear what's going on and what's going wrong. And that's what we work so hard to reveal in every episode, every time we unlock the leadership door. So thank you for joining us. I'm Richard Clayman, and until next time, goodbye.